We Are Vineyard.
Where we want to be and where we want to help the local church to be in each of these contexts is at a place where the hope is sustainable, where it isn't just a meal thrown off the back of the truck, but it's a meal in a public school, so that it's an incentive for that child to get all the other things that they need to be successful in life for, and primarily a chance to know Jesus. And so even in a situation like Ukraine, what can we do right now that will result, months, years, decades down the road in something that's sustainable?
Welcome to the We Are Vineyard podcast, conversations to help us grow with Jesus and each other. In today's episode, our host, Jay Pathick, National Director for Vineyard USA, talks to Bryan McLees from Convoy of Hope. Let's listen in.
So, Bryan, thanks for joining me bright and early.
Oh, man.
Is
it bright yet?
It isn't bright yet. Yeah. You said that when you walked in, you were like, Jay, it's like we're going to play golf. And other than flights, because you have to wake up early for flights, I do wake up for golf.
You do. I've seen it.
And I'm trying to think of another thing I would wake up this early for other than Bryan McLees.
Oh,
That's it.
Yeah.
Or you for me, it turns out.
Yeah.
So anyway, thanks for doing this. And as we've done every other time when we do this, it'd be great to hear a bit of your story, kind of what brought you,
Sure.
Into the vineyard, into working with Convoy of Hope, because, we've been friends a long time.
Yeah.
I think I met you when I first moved to plant the church.
It wasn't before then, but it wasn't long after.
It wasn't long after. And so that was, we moved on the 9/11, as you may remember.
That's your story, yeah.
That's our story. And then you were in Fort Collins.
Area.
Yeah, area.
Yeah, we're Hicks. We live outside off a gravel road. But no, we don't live in the city. We live.
Listen, anybody's ever seen your place, they know it is not a hick place. Gorgeous place, beautiful home. Yeah, so it would be great to hear a bit of your story. So tell us a bit about where you grew up.
Yeah. So I grew up in a pretty liberal community, a little bit left of Boulder, Colorado, Eugene, Oregon.
Wow. So
yeah.
That's a small margin to get left of.
There aren't many of us. Yeah. Grateful Dead named it their number 3 favorite place to play in the world.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah. But that area was just rife with folks coming north from having been experiencing Jesus and the Jesus movement. And not to date myself, but I had a favorite character. I'm a PK. And in my dad's church, there were a lot of folks on the hippie trail, but this standout guy, if you picture Grizzly Adams from that show way before you were born.
I remember, I know the show.
Yeah. Picture that guy. And before the Lord came in his life, he lived in a tree. His alias was Animal. And his favorite thing in life was to lead people to Jesus after he met Christ. And he's the one who told me, he said, man, this guy was a contractor. He was a really skilled carpenter, had been involved in the actual construction of Calvary Chapel. He was Chuck Jr.'s close friend. And so when he said, listen, when you go down to Fuller, that was already out. I was planning on heading south. He said, you need to look up the vineyard. And it just went ping, and like, if this guy thinks it.
So Grizzly Adams,
John Dallas Martin.
Who now is an evangelist.
Yeah.
Says to you as a PK.
Yeah.
Hey, when you go to Fuller, you should check out the vineyard.
Yeah.
And he's just crazy enough that you're like, I don't know exactly what that is, but.
Yeah. It was that season where, people called seminary cemetery, and You know, if you're gonna do that, if you have to do that,
if you have to go to seminary,
salvage the whole thing for me by going and hanging out at the vineyard. So that was it.
From Eugene, Oregon. Yeah.
So
also a beautiful place.
Well, yeah. So, you know, after I'm at Fuller a while, I had an Old Testament class, and you know, I'm thinking about the vineyard and didn't know where it was, how to find it. This was before cell phones and GPS and all this stuff, and you needed somebody to point you.
Somebody, yeah.
And so this guy next to me named Andy, he mentions on a break, he's on staff at the vineyard on West Side, West LA Vineyard. And I go, well, it was Andy Comiskey. You know Andy.
Yeah,
so
I do.
And he said, yeah, I'm preaching there next week, so you should come. And man, what I experienced there, you know, just beyond the beauty of the music, I love bluegrass music. I'm eclectic. And Larry Myers was playing mandolin. I can still see it. And got to know Larry later, but man, the love of Jesus in the room was so tangible, you know, that I said, this is going to be life-changing. And that first Sunday, a fellow by the name of Ken Gullickson gets up and says, some of you are called to move to South Africa and help us start a church. Some of you are called, I think, to go to Boston.
This is like
my first Sunday. And wow, you know, I just felt like, I don't know how, but that's for me.
Wow.
So, yeah, and then it took all these everyday sort of ordinary glory moments that led to that. But in fact, I was right.
Yeah.
So
you're there.
Yeah.
I mean, like most people, when they think, I'm going to check out a church this week.
Right.
Some of the things you're describing, they kind of hope for, like, man, I hope there's like a great worship experience. I hope the teaching's pretty good. And even if I could have like a prayer moment, that would be cool. But it also included for you, what if you went wherever the Lord calls you to go? This is week 1.
No, you're giving me way too much credit. Like
I'm just thinking, no visitors thinking, I'm attending church today.
Yeah, right.
To be sent
now
to
I'm
plant
tracking
a church.
Yeah.
Like that doesn't happen.
No. And I hadn't even heard that phrase.
Of church planting.
No.
But you're a PK.
Yeah.
So, and you have a heart for the Lord, and you've been told by Grizzly Adams.
Yeah.
These are these people, you got to meet them. So it is queued up in a certain kind of way.
It really is. And that phrase, it's just about loving Jesus and loving people, wasn't on a t-shirt yet or a bumper sticker.
Right.
You know, or a mission statement.
Right.
It just was so, like I wanted simple, you know what I mean? Out of that experience, I was like, okay, he's calling. He didn't say plant a church. He said called to go do what Jesus is doing in South Africa and stuff. So I'm just in this thinking somehow this figures into the future. But at that point, I was still thinking, you know, I just want to own a ski shop and tell people about Jesus. Like I transfer out of business into theology, but
which makes sense. So really what you're doing is saying, I like Jesus.
Yeah.
I like skiing.
Yes.
What if
exactly
I had a ski shop where I told people about Jesus, which is logical, you know, I mean, and eclectic, maybe is a nice way of saying it. But, but you're not thinking, hey, I think I could go to somewhere I've never been before to plant a church.
Yeah, I had been a part of a campus ministry at the U of O, and I'd been there a while and knew enough to know that I didn't know enough, and it was okay, but it wasn't going great, and so I was sort of coming up with another strategy, like maybe I'd be better, kind of like doing what John Dallas Martin does, Grizzly. And I had a ski shop to tell people about Jesus, because then they're coming in for wax and you know, all that stuff on their ski. So But all of a sudden, I was just weeping in this room with the worship and the bluegrass sound and all of it, thinking, wait a minute, there might be more that I haven't seen that would fit me. And, wasn't really processing it, but I was in an intramural softball game. I was standing at second base, and this guy, Scott, who I really admired, we were just standing there talking between batters. And I said, we're almost to graduation at this point. What are you going to do? And he said, I'm going to go plant a church. And that's when the phrase, hit me. I had a year to go, but he was leaving to plant a church. And I thought, that's what Ken meant. Is like, they're going to go, anyway. It's funny how it's just.
It is. Well, and I've probably heard you more than once tell stories of being at Fuller and doing the famous class, MC 510.
Right.
With Wimber.
Right.
And so you have this introduction to the vineyard through Ken Gullickson.
Yes.
But then you're in class, and all of a sudden you're in front of Wimber and C. Peter Wagner.
Yeah. There was buzz on campus. Christianity Today had come out with the article on MC 510. The majority of the faculty was not best pleased.
Right.
And so it had gone from this really large venue down to a room that seated about 80 students. In the back row, I remember 5 or 6 faculty just emotionally, I remember them arms folded. That's the venue I took MC 510 in. And leading up to that.
And MC 510, I think that the title was Signs and Wonders.
And Church Growth.
That's right. Yep.
Taught by C. Peter Wagner, who all he did was get up and introduce John. I'm dead serious.
But he was the credentialized.
Yes.
Yeah, got it.
And he had the little chart that showed, the church grow right here.
Right.
So all of that was starting to grow in me, like, what am I really for? And I had this little side hustle on campus to pay, for room and board kind of thing. And we would walk students to their car. That's what we did. It was called the escort service, which I didn't want to say. Wait,
hold on. Wait, we can't let that go. So you had a job with the seminary
for Fuller.
Oh my God. Called the escort service.
We had red windbreakers, Jay. That's all. And a little thing of mace.
A flashlight. Yeah, right.
We're down in
because you're supposed to just walk people to their car at night.
Yeah, it was a high crime area.
Right. Okay, good.
Yeah.
I'm storing that away, by the way.
We walked people to their cars.
That's coming back.
Yeah.
Okay.
For those of you listening, we walked people to their cars. Anyway, and part of the other thing was we had to do, they call it a round 1, round 2, round 3, and you would go secure buildings, just make sure everything was okay. And there was a figure that in the community people knew of and referred to him as the twirler, because he had a obsessive compulsive disorder. And he would just stand in a corner and spin and just scream at people, profanity, urinate in his pants. Just 6'5", 4, something like that. Really imposing figure. Anyway, so I'm doing one of these rounds, and I thought, I'm going to wrap it up tonight. And so I cut diagonally across a vacant lot, broken glass, tall grass, and this guy over to my right, I heard this snarling and I look over, and it's this man, and he's in torment. And so I found myself just approaching him, like, are you okay? I said, can I pray for you? And I look, and he is tearing, I'm not kidding, he's tearing pages out of a book, which when I get close to him, I can see is the Bible. That's all I'm going to say. I mean, it was awful. And he's screaming. And I said, can I pray for you now? And he said, oh, and he stopped. And he just looked at me and go, please, the demons are so bad tonight. Just like that. And I said, I'll pray for you now, but can you come and stay at my place tonight? Would you like a hot meal? Or? And it was just coming out of my mouth.
But he just sort of snaps too.
Yeah, he just all of a sudden coherent.
Yeah.
And I said, what's your name? And he said, my name's John. And I could really. So we get to my apartment. It's 11 o'clock at night, and I make him, what we had in the fridge, a burrito or something.
And you have roommates?
Yeah. Yeah, who were still at the library studying for systematic theology or
It's
something.
so great.
Yeah, and so I said, listen, I've got to change. Why don't you take a shower? If it's okay, I'd like to wash your clothes. And I gave him my Oregon sweatshirt, and which came to like midriff on him. He's really tall, and my sweatpants. So when my roommates return, they see this guy in our living room in my
Who they've seen around.
Oh,
I mean, he's like
everybody
known. Yeah.
But when I had a chance to feed him, Jay, and we're standing in the living room, the presence of God. I mean, he was so with us. Just two people broken in different ways. I can't tell you what, it was almost like liquid love, in the room. I said, let's see if Jesus wants to just drive these demons out, And I started praying, and he just got sweeter and calmer. But there was no,
There wasn't like movie Hollywood.
Nothing.
Head spinning
Nothing.
around. Yeah.
In fact, I thought I blew it or something.
Right.
'Cause
Maybe I missed it.
Yeah.
Why isn't there that?
We
Yeah.
did all this groundwork, Lord. I mean, we fed him, we clothed him.
Yeah. I've seen the movies. I
Is
know
this
what's supposed to
yeah.
happen. Right. Yeah.
None of that. That night was life-changing. Just, I wanted more of Jesus after that night for what he was doing in the room. So, went to the class a couple weeks later after that. But leading up to that, let me just say this. I had a time where I just thought, Lord, what is it? Is it all in church? Because I just don't see myself as a pastor. I don't see myself, as much of anything, really.
Ski shop owner.
Ski shop.
Yeah.
And so I figured that's where I went. I went up to the mountains to pray, and up to the top of Mount Wilson outside of Pasadena. And Jay, it was ugly. I mean, I was crying. I was shouting. I was... if I had a stick, I'd find it, I'd break it over a log, like, Lord, I got to get through to you. And it's just like in the living room, nothing dramatic happened, no Pentecostal Roman candles, no illumination or revelation from the seventh dimension.
Yeah, yeah, totally.
Yeah, just
like, God, I don't know what you want me to do. Yeah, like,
no,
this doesn't seem to fit. I don't know if I'm a pastor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I think about everyone I know has had one of those prayer times. Like,
really?
What is all this?
Yeah. So the following, 3 nights later, I go to MC 510. And Pete introduces John. John gets up and he starts to do his lecture, and then he just closes, like he's been wrestling with the Lord or something. And he closes his note, and he said, before we start tonight, I just can't, the Holy Spirit just is not going to let me go past asking this question. And he used this word, if you have really wrestled with your calling and whether or not your anointing is from God, I want you to understand that there's a ordination, he used the word ordination, of men, and there's an ordination of the Holy Spirit. And you've been wrestling, really wrestling with this. I want you to come down. Well, by the time he finished saying wrestling, I was standing up.
Yeah. And
I was going to the front because I was just, it's time to do business, feeling. And of course, when you do that, you're the first one there.
Yes.
And so, I got the professors in the back row folding their arms. There's, my classmates what's with McLees, and I'm down there, and I am, before he even comes over and pray for, I am weeping, and I'm saying, this is it. Whatever you want. Next thing I know, he would do this thing where he came over and he just sort of placed his feet. Now, he's a big man, but he took his right foot and just almost stomped on my feet. Lord, guide these feet where you want them to walk. And he started, lead him into the streets and lead him to care for the poor, right? And those were things that had just actually, I felt nothing was happening.
Yeah.
Everything was shifting.
Wow. So John Wimber is praying for you, send him to the poor.
Yes. Send him to the poor, the highways, the byways.
Then you're having spinning man sitting in your house.
Yeah, just days before this whole class thing.
Wow.
You know?
And so you're just suddenly like, this is God. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know what I'm supposed to do, but
Yeah.
I'm sensing the presence, the power of God.
Yeah, and in fact, I missed a step. I don't want this to go too long, but
No, it's great.
The class before, I had just had this experience with John in my apartment, praying for him, feeding him. The very next class, John mentions this guy, like, and the thing that had happened before I even had this encounter, one of the reasons I stopped and I asked him, "Do you want to come to my house?" is I had this little impression in my head, like, Lord, is this a spiritual Goliath? Like, he's right here in the shadow of Fuller and nobody can free him. Don't you want to free him?
Yeah.
I had those thoughts while I was doing my rounds. I'd see him almost every day. Don't you want to free him, you know? So that was part of why I stopped.
Wow.
And then John, the week before, references the man that stands on the corner and spins. Like, God has freedom for that guy. And I had just had him in my apartment. So I raised my hand. I said, I tried, John. I
brought him in.
I brought him in. I fed him. And he had this little twinkle in his eyes. Look at me. I said, was it like major league demons? I couldn't get him out or whatever. But nothing seemed to happen. He said, no, you did good. And he just winked at me. So I think that was part of what he was praying too when he was saying, send him to the poor. So all these lining up.
I think for those of us that have been in the vineyard a long time know that, like, this has been central to what it means to be the vineyard, is to care for the poor.
Yes.
Though maybe from the outside, we'd be known for the MC 510 class and church planting and maybe even renewal meetings.
Yeah.
But about anyone I know that was in specifically the environments you were in, and around some of the folks that were sort of starting this thing that we now know as the vineyard, they have story after story after story of caring for the poor, radical generosity.
It's true.
And going to the park and doing feeding programs and buying houses and housing people. But somehow that isn't always, in the sort of maybe public story. But it was certainly in Wimber's heart, and then obviously you're right in the middle of it.
Well, it was so in Wimber's heart. Like, getting back to that moment where I went down and he's stomping on my feet, set a hook in his jaw, lead him to the poor. Sort of, I'm weeping, singing in tongues, faculty in the back having like moments.
Yeah.
And John starts taking me around the room by the hand and having people join hands, and he called them little daisy chains, and all these international students, like Asian friends and African friends, and they start singing in tongues and weeping, and that became more to the story later. But just parenthetically, what you said is so true. I thought, I'm going to get labeled as the guy that sings in tongues, and I already walk funny. I mean, now. And so, no, the message was so strong and centric around caring for the poor with John. Like, that had been a shift in his life. And he was so pronounced in how he talked about that, that people would come. I had a guy literally come up to me and said, "So you're a vineyard guy?" And I thought, oh, here it comes. You sing in tongues in front of your class or whatever, And he goes, "I suppose you think I should sell my BMW and give the money to the poor."
Wow.
Yeah, I said, "Wow, you have a BMW?" We're in seminary, man. What?
Let's start there.
Yeah.
How did you do that? Yeah.
No, but that's how pronounced it was.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So later, that was my graduating year. I found out, like, I went back to visit the campus a year later, see some friends that were still in school. I was curious about, whatever became John, And it turns out that those Asian students that we held hands with, and after I graduated, they started inviting John to their apartment.
Not John Wimber, John the spinner.
John?
Yeah.
Let's get the John that we're talking about straight, Bryan. I need help, Jay.
No, I'm just checking.
It was it was dark when we started this. Okay. And so that group of people just became community to him, and
Wow.
and he was delivered like fully
Wow.
over time
Yeah.
in his right mind, clothed,
Wow.
all of it.
So now by this point you're like, whatever this is, I'm in for it.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, and then I thought, well, I'll take the other class now on church planning, and that was Pete Wagner, and John came to that class and taught, and it was like, hey, reunion, how are you doing, man? You look good. And I said, yeah, I think God's going to do something with me in the vineyard. He says, I do too. That lecture he gave that night, he said, again, about the poor, when the local church cares for the poor, she steps into a kingdom dynamic that releases momentum, kingdom momentum in the local church. He was really developing his theology around it then. And then in that class, we were given an assignment by Pete Wagner to go and interview somebody who had planted a church within the last year and was still pastoring that church. So you could know kind of what the struggles are, what the reality is. And
yeah.
so I knew exactly who I wanted to interview. I picked Ken because he had gone from Santa Monica over to Newport. They were 9 months in, and I think they're running around 700 people.
Wow. Yeah, normal church plant.
For Ken, Yeah, for Ken it was. And so we're interviewing him, and I don't remember much about the interview, but I remember what he said when we got there. I brought two other guys who have had amazing ministries in Kingdom Life. One in Japan, another in just prophetic and beautiful ways. We all showed up, having driven down to Newport from Pasadena. And he said, "Are you guys hungry? Like, can I get you breakfast?" And here we're expecting, this guy, planted the first 8 vineyard churches, and are we going to get through his secretary?
Totally. He's a big deal. Totally.
Yeah. And it was so disarming, the kindness. And,
wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then after everybody left, I was just kind of lingering, going, my first Sunday, you mentioned all these things, and he goes, "Yeah, what do you want to be when you grow up? Are you supposed to go to South Africa?" I said, "No. But I was going to have a ski shop, and I was going to, He said, "Well, if you don't know what you want to be when you grow up, why don't you come with me to Boston?" And like inside of me, it just felt like Christmas, 4th of July, going on a ski holiday to Sun Valley, Idaho, or something, just all at once.
So you go from, let's do an interview about church planning, to
recruited.
Let's move to Boston.
And I'm in. I know it.
Wow.
But I needed to, call my dad and say, I know we've been grooming Bryan for taking over the church here in Eugene. I love the church, but I've got a different assignment.
Wow.
And he's like, I know.
Yeah.
Lord had alerted him, and So
next thing you know, had you been to Boston before?
Never. No, look at me.
So within a few weeks, you're like, cool.
Yeah, it was literally, I got to go back to Oregon and pack, And
then I'm just going to go to the other coast.
Right. But I started going to these prayer times with Ken and Joni at Jeff and Patty Swerk's house. And I'm just the snot-nosed seminarian there. And they all have real lives. They've got businesses and stuff like that. And they're packing their stuff and going to Boston. And I'm part of the squad. I was excited,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so then you just show up in Boston, start doing the same thing.
Yeah. 3 months later, true story. I show up, all my stuff in the truck. I show up there, and Ken goes, "Oh, you really did come."
So he's not convinced you're even coming.
So now he's got a problem. He's got to think up a job for me. Like, here's some bulletins, pass them out.
Oh no.
That was my big intro.
Oh no.
Yeah, like, of course, man. Don't you remember?
Yeah, what did you think?
We were praying all those times.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, yeah, he had planted a few churches. That's what he's like. A lot of people say they're coming, aren't coming.
Exactly.
Yeah, right. Wow. So then you're in the East Coast for how many years?
Yeah, not quite 6.
6 years.
Not quite 6. 2 church plants.
Wow. And then you start going, am I supposed to be here? Or
yeah.
Next?
So I felt really called relationally. Like Ken and Joni are still among our closest, and I knew I was called relationally to serve their vision till I had one, and the vision just wasn't coming, Jay. Like it wasn't like oh, I know what to do. And around that time, John asked Ken to be the first national, I don't know what we called it then, coordinator, director.
Yeah, director, yeah.
And so he left South Dartmouth. We'd been in Framingham, then we were in South Dartmouth. And he left South Dartmouth and asked me, are you supposed to be the pastors here? And Bob and Mary Palumbo were where we landed.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. And Barb and I just began fasting and praying. I'd met Barb and she found Christ in our home group. Mm-hmm. All those things that God did in those 5.5 years.
Wow. I've
got a group of guys during COVID. We've met every other Friday on Zoom from that first home group.
Wow.
10 of us from that home group. It was a very large home group, but those are the guys that were in it. And we're still close, just relationally. It was special. But Ken was leaving, and I knew I wasn't supposed to stay, so we did the old, let's fast and pray. To keep it simple. And God spoke to us about the hearts of the children be turned towards the parents, and the parents. And my dad was retiring and had resigned from his church. And so we went to relocate them in Colorado. And on that journey, that trek back to Eugene and then to Fort Collins, they wanted to be near their siblings. They had about 5 or 6 of them still living within a 100-mile radius of Fort Collins. So that's why they chose it. Wow. We were just going to drop them off and
make sure they were set.
Go to Seattle or something,
right.
And that's when the Lord really said, "No, this is Plan A, Adventure A, if you want it."
And then that's when I find you.
It is.
So you moved in to Fort Collins in what year?
89.
89.
Yeah.
Wow. So when I bump into you, you're leading a church, the tool room,
right?
Tool room in Old Town. Well, it became Old Town.
Yeah.
Vineyard, right?
Well, yeah. That was sort of the subtitle name.
Okay.
But see, Rick and Becky Olmsted were where we were serving. I'd been on the board. I'd been on staff. And there was just a gap demographically in the church of 20-somethings were just few and far between. And it was, can you go crack the code kind of thing? And sort of put the front door of the church way, way, way out there and be your own church if need be. I'm really condensing. But,
yeah, I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So we went to a turn-of-the-century flophouse hotel and rented the maintenance room on the second floor. And it had a little red sign, tool room, above it. And then we just met for prayer and hanging out. And well, hey, I'll meet you at the tool room. Is the tool room open? It just was in the vernacular.
Wow.
And before you know it, we had people from Nebraska, Wyoming, Colorado Springs, kind of the, neo-hippie trail. And it was wonderful. Like the people that, conversion growth, you know what I mean?
Have you been enjoying enjoying the We Are Vineyard podcast and have some questions you'd love to dig into from past episodes, the last week of March, we will be hosting a listener question episode with Jay Pathick and Caleb Maskell, the Associate National Director for Theology and Education for Vineyard USA. Send in your questions to podcast@vineyardusa.org, and maybe your question can be one we cover in this episode. More information is included in the show notes and on our social media. We'd love to hear from you. Also, as a part of our monthly recommended resources, this month we're suggesting that everyone reads Managing Leadership Anxiety by Steve Cuss. Later this month, we'll interview Steve to hear a deeper dive on this book and much more. Managing Leadership Anxiety is available through Vineyard Resources and wherever books are sold.
Well, I remember meeting some of your folks at that time being like, man, this is real. Like, people, this isn't just church to do church. Like I remember bumping into folks and believe you were caring for folks around there and all the stuff we just talked about. Heart for the poor and people that nobody knew what to do with. And I remember that. Yeah. Like even in those, because, we were just planting. We had like a small group. And and then somewhere in there, because then the next thing I know, the tsunami hits, which is 2004,
Correct.
I think.
Day after Christmas.
And I'm distraught. I mean, I just remember, we have our little church. And Danielle and I are going, I know we're supposed to do something, but this is in, the other side of the world. And I'm like scanning through organizations that are doing things over there. And I'm trying to figure out, what can a small church do when there's like a worldwide catastrophe?
Right.
And I keep coming across this thing called Convoy of Hope. I don't know what it is, but I'm seeing little stories and updates of what they're doing and how they work with the local church and all this stuff. And then somebody says to me, Bryan McLees, he's doing stuff with Convoy of Hope. And I was like, what? And so I reach out to you and you're like, oh yeah, we should talk. And that was sort of my foray in understanding what Convoy of Hope is doing and how to connect with something across the world when I still had a small church.
Yeah. And prior to Fuller and those things, my dad had helped establish a church in Colombo, Sri Lanka. And we were in the practice of Christmas phone calls with our friends because we had seen phenomenal, signs and wonders church growth. I had seen miracles. And the stories are incredible for another podcast maybe, but literally years while I was in Boston, Todd Hunter was the new national director, and he had a guy in, and I'm sorry, I can't draw his name up right now, but he talked about, the conference was, take the best of the Pentecostals and the best of the evangelicals and go. Remember? And he had a guy talk who was a church historian, modern day, and missiologist, and he cited Colombo, Sri Lanka in his talk. And I'm with the Fort Collins crew, Rick and Becky, they're elbowing me. Hey, that's, and I go, and the dates, and sure enough. So we had seen.
It was stuff you had seen.
Stuff from my father's time with.
Was that Jenkins, the next Christendom, that guy?
Ooh, that sounds familiar.
I think it was him.
I'm not. Yeah, I'm not the fact check guy.
Yeah. Somebody else.
I'm not. My wife.
Yeah, fair enough.
Barb, she's the fact check.
Yeah.
So anyway, I had seen those things, but it was the kindness that was our calling card in the vineyard. And Ken and Joni and John reaching out to me while I was a student and really looking at those. The kindness is what drew me to the vineyard. And I think, if I may, we're living in a time, Jay, right now where kindness is just almost on par with a sign and wonder.
Yeah.
The passage in Isaiah, if you put away malicious talk and the pointing of the finger and you spend yourself on behalf of the poor, it even says, if you give them bread from your store, and you invite the stranger in, and you give them a place to stay in your home, like the refugee in some translations. That really is what I started seeing through Convoy of Hope when my friends were impacted in Sri Lanka. I didn't know about Convoy of Hope. And I had a conversation with a friend who, joyfully, I had a chance to introduce you to, Deshaun Wickwamaratne. And I got a hold of him finally after 2.5 months. I didn't know if he was alive from the pictures we saw, And I said, Dish, what do you need? And he said, I won't do it in person. Although he says I do a good one. But I mean, he says, I need 1 million meals. And I was, I'm pastoring the tool room.
Yeah.
And we had just struggled at Thanksgiving to get a couple of turkeys. You know what I mean?
Yeah, how would I even do that?
And I didn't know it was so doable because I hadn't heard about Convoy. And in that conversation with him, I started learning this is a legit organization. They were 10 years old. And I'm not surprised that you learned about them before me because you're good at that. But God,
just research, desperation. Yeah.
I do kingdom advancement for dummies. All right. So I needed really clear, John Dallas Martin. I needed John Wimber in my class. I needed Andy Kaminsky sitting next to me. I mean, all those things to get me where I'm supposed to be. But you just look it up and find it through research.
That is not at all how that went.
Yeah.
Desperation. Yeah. And so then you realize these guys are partnering with corporations. They're in a really smart way figuring out how to engage in disaster relief, but then also do feeding programs. And again, 10 years in, they're, from then until now, it's expanded massively.
Yeah.
And then somehow you decide, maybe I should work with these guys.
Well, yeah, it was not my idea. It was actually a person who had attended a church there in Eugene. We remember being friends at 5 years old.
Wow.
So that's many decades now.
Yeah.
And I was looking for him I won't go into it, it'll take me down a rabbit trail, but permission to share a story. He had a very sad family life growing up. And I needed permission from him, just for integrity to share from his pain and how God had redeemed through my father, be sort of a surrogate dad. And I thought, I need to get a hold of him. So that was kind of the impetus. The tsunami hits, and I'm looking for Convoy of Hope. And in that one person, Jeff Swaim, I said, wait, you work I've been looking for Convoy of Hope.
Wow.
He goes, yeah, I'm the world director. I said, you're kidding. And so he goes, what if we could collaborate? What if with the Vineyard don't they have a DNA for the poor? He goes, oh. I mean, that was just like a conversation like you and I are having right now.
And then you end up going, I'll do that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'll be a liaison for Convoy of Hope.
That was the word they said.
Wow.
Could you be a liaison for
Wow.
Very organic, very relational. Again, I need it really clear.
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
But it's interesting when you look over the arc of your story then. So encounters with the Lord, church planting, for the poor, work in Sri Lanka.
Yeah.
Friend from school.
Yeah.
All these things coalesce then with, what if I could serve the Vineyard and Convoy of Hope by building this liaison?
Yeah.
And so tell us just a smidge about so if I'm a Vineyard pastor, I'm just a person.
Right.
And I want to connect with Convoy. What exactly, how does Convoy work? What do they do?
Yeah. Yeah. So, well, the website's a great start.
It's a great start. We'll put that in the show notes.
Yeah.
So we can look at it. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's developed from community development and care, but always through the local church from day one. We love you, Jesus loves you, and there's a church right here that put this whole thing together. You should get to know them. And then we're just the ghosts in the machine from that point. We just resource the church. And then hurricane. Can you use some of that product? Could you go and we started disaster services. And then in disaster services in some creative access countries where you're not really allowed to, well, the church could be persecuted even in those, they still want disaster services.
Right.
And in a lot of these governments, you know, they're corrupt. It's kleptocracy abounds, and you just, but they'll turn a blind eye if you're helping solve this crisis moment. And we can develop program even in some of those countries. And then what if we could do children's feeding? What if we could do empowering women, help them start business? What if we could train them in agriculture? What if we trained the women to do agriculture? What if we empowered little girls from a young age to learn that they're significant and they can say no to things that are inappropriate? They're not property. They could have a new identity. What if the public school starts opening for us to come and serve, and the people who feed the children at lunchtime every day, what if they're church planters? What if, you know, and public schools would allow a weekly assembly to proclaim the name of Jesus in full-on worship? You know, it's happening. Like in a small school in Manila in the Philippines, I visited a small school. And they said on the itinerary, you'll visit a small public school, 4,000 kids.
Wow.
Yeah. And in it, maybe you've seen the little video of Kate and Kate's story. She was a student in that school. Their church went from just a handful of volunteers to several hundred because of their association to the public school with a feeding program.
Wow.
What if we had Vineyard guys in the queue who, you know,
to help plant churches
anywhere we have a school program.
Wow. Well, and you know, for us, first I'm thinking, I realize about the tsunami, and then I hear about how you do One Day to Feed the World, which is in your church one time a year. You ask for them to give 1 day's worth of income. And we give it away to partner. And so, because for me as a pastor, you know, every time there's a disaster, hurricane, tornadoes, whatever, somebody grabs you in the lobby and says, what are we going to do? And, you know, when I first met you and we were trying to figure this out, I'm like, we're a small church. Like, what am I going to do? Like,
exactly.
Like Katrina, we're going to all jump in a pickup truck and drive down there and do what? And the friends that I knew who did that, people in humanitarian work know that you create a disaster in a disaster. when people show up with bottles of water and
you said it, not me.
Well, I'm just saying that's what happens. They mean well, but they end up in an environment where they came to help and now they end up needing the help, which is a debacle. Whereas if you can work with people who are experts, they know what they're doing, and they're prepared. So all of a sudden for us now, when there's a disaster, I can say to the church on a Sunday, hey, if you gave to One Day to Feed the World, you already gave to work that's happening now.
Yeah, that's a day's wage a year.
That's right.
That's it.
That's it.
Above and beyond the tithe.
Yes.
This isn't to replace.
Yeah, don't move the money over.
No.
Right. And frankly, in our church, it's one of those exciting Sundays for us. You know, every year I say, this is what we're going to do.
Awesome.
And then when something's happening, Convoy does a great job putting out little videos like, okay, here's what we're doing now based on the tornadoes in the Midwest. Here's what, there was this horrible earthquake. Here's the things that we're doing. And it enables our whole church to have a sense like, okay, we really do care about another part of the world. And we partner not just in giving money, but I've been to feeding programs in Haiti.
You have,
and El Salvador and Ethiopia, and we get to see the women's empowerment, and we can take teams,
field teams
to be a part of that work so that our church feels connected to the churches on the ground that are doing the work to care for the poor with Convoy's help.
Can I flip and be the interviewer? What's that like? What's that like for your church that you're doing that?
Oh, it's huge. Well, I mean, I think, again, think about the things that we know we're supposed to do.
Yeah.
We're supposed to care for the poor. We know this.
Yeah.
We're also supposed to engage in mission somehow. We kind of know this, and the Vineyard has had an extensive history.
Yeah.
Partnerships and all kinds of things. So we're in that. But sometimes we're not sure how do those things link up.
Yeah.
So we're going to just show up somewhere and do what?
Right.
Build a wall or whatever. But if we can partner with people that we know have been there before we came,
Yeah.
will be there after we leave, are working with the local church and, with the Vineyard Church in a lot of places.
Right.
So we can show up and support a local church while caring for the poor with normal people in our church, and they come home and see their whole city differently. I mean, you see your bedroom differently. You see
the closet,
your street.
Yeah.
That's right. Everything looks different.
Right.
And you start to realize that you can teach your kids to think about places in the world that they've only seen on the news are now people we know. It's names we know. It's people we know.
Wow.
It's churches that we feel connected to.
Yeah.
And especially because we go and we keep going.
Yeah.
So there's a connection.
Yeah. So that's it. I mean, you're not reacting. You're responding.
Yeah.
And
we're proactive.
Yeah.
So we're deciding ahead of time, something's going to happen this year.
Right.
A tornado, a disaster. And even if that didn't happen, which of course it will, there's feeding programs that need to happen in order to strengthen the church in places that it's challenging. So I could not be more excited about Convoy, more grateful for him. And the moment we're in now with the Ukraine.
Yeah. Yeah.
Convoy is one of our partners with the Vineyard. We've talked about it on our Vineyard stuff, social media and stuff, asking Vineyard churches to consider how to work with them. And I know it's a little tricky because some of the stuff you're doing, you can't really talk about publicly all the way. And
well, it is, right.
But I'd love to hear even an update that's happening right now.
Yeah. Yeah. When you get to that place, we're just talking about the things I've done out of reaction. I a lot of things I'd redo if I had a do-over. But if I've had time to think through, what do we want to see happen here? Where our end game, where we want to be, and where we want to help the local church to be in each of these contexts, is at a place where the hope is sustainable. Where it isn't just a meal thrown off the back of the truck, but it's a meal in a public school. So that it's an incentive for that child to get all the other things that they need to be successful in life for, and primarily a chance to know Jesus. And so even in a situation like Ukraine, what can we do right now that will result, months, years, decades down the road in something that's sustainable? Every disaster is different, but when you talk about a war, I mean,
the images we're seeing,
Jay, yeah, it can be just overwhelming. But I can tell you right now, the church, I think we're in a moment bigger than the Southeastern Asian tsunami for me. That was a big moment. I think as a world, as the church in the world, that if it's hard to see these images, but if we'll not look away, and if we'll think through how can we engage in a way that sustains hope, it'll be transformative for them and for the church. And the church may just stop with malicious talk, stop with pointing the finger, and spend herself on behalf of the poor. Then her light will break forth like a dawn, and her healing will speedily come. There's things I see in the body of Christ that are broken, that this just might be a moment where we all get to go to hospital and be healed of and freed from. And there may be a new unity, a new purposefulness by putting our hand to something that really would be easy to look away from.
Yeah.
So right when a person does once a year give a day's wage, and they give it through Convoy, through collaboration with over 400 corporate sponsors, those those resources are multiplied.
Yeah.
Right? It doesn't go to Convoy. It goes through Convoy, and then it's amplified. It can be released then, multiplied and released through local churches that are in the context. So right now, the response is looking to a sustainable hope, and we're gathering the resources and the relationships together, demonstrate the love of Jesus in 6 countries at once. Of course, the ones that are in the news and, on social media, you'll see Convoy of Hope in Poland right now.
Because receiving people who are
receiving
running
people
for their life.
Right.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned, women and children, and also the elderly. But women and children are some of the folks that God's given Convoy to focus on as a strategy, just for sustainable hope. So when we see this, we see, oh my goodness, Lord, these are the people that you told us to focus on. Let's help the church resource those folks. And so trucking in these countries, warehousing, all of it is being assembled right now. Because what it appears to be happening, very little conversation about the women and children. Centers around going back into Ukraine. It centers around being as far from the Polish border, the Ukraine border, into Poland. And not just there, but Germany, Canada, United States are what people are talking about. That's the word on the street from
how to resource where they're going to as much as where they're running from. Right?
Aiming the resources towards where they're heading so that we can continue to care for them. Things like water, food, medical supply, sheltering, baby supplies, general hygiene, feminine hygiene, all the things that you would in a disaster, but completing an in-context supply chain there.
Right.
That will service the local church. Even forming relationships to buy petrol, gasoline for the cars that are being volunteered to go to the border. That's the church doing that. It's a shining moment already.
Yeah. Wow.
For how she's running to the situation. So,
well, and I just this past Sunday, I got to stand on our stage and say, well, I know we're all concerned.
Yeah.
But here's the good news. If you participate in our One Day to Feed the World.
Correct.
We are already helping.
Right.
And we can give more. So
right.
Let's make an offering. Let's reach to them if you want to. Oh, yeah. Well,
yeah.
I don't think there's anybody that's thinking, everyone's thinking, somebody's got, who's doing anything?
Yeah.
But to know that we have a partner in Convoy gives us faith, confidence.
Yeah, and One Day to Feed the World is what keeps Convoy nimble. It's okay to designate it Ukraine. One day makes it nimble enough so that, yes, we can say yes to Ukraine. But by the way, we're responding to flooding in Australia right now because of One Day to... So just as an example.
Yeah, that means there's more than one thing, plus all the feeding programs you're normally doing,
and
plus all the women's empowerment you're already doing.
You remember a couple of years ago where we set a goal to be feeding children, 500,000 children by 2025. And I'm just now free to release the where we are in that process. Like when we set that goal, we were at 180,000 children a day. That's like 3 years ago. As of this last weekend, I can say, through your generosity, participation, Vineyard USA, and churches like you that have a heart for the poor, the new number of children that we're feeding is 465,143.
Wow. A day.
A day in school.
Wow.
So it's like we are yoked together with Jesus, and he's got the big shoulders.
Wow.
This is his favor. And we're a ways from 2025 with beyond that a goal of 1 million by 2030. So
wow. Well, Bryan, I am so grateful for Convoy of Hope. We have a bunch of things in the show notes people can look at. We have this really cool video with Rich Nathan, one of our pastors, who walks around with Hal Donaldson around in El Salvador. And so we'll link a whole bunch of things in there for people to take a look at, but they can get to you through the website. I'm so, so grateful. And it's so cool to hear your story, Bryan, of all the ways that God worked in the vineyard in your life. You're a vineyard guy through and through.
Right.
Heart for the poor that leads to this pivotal partnership with a friend, a dear friend of ours in the ministry Convoy of Hope. And so for any vineyard pastor, church, man, take a look at this. They do such a good job with resources and ways to help coach you through how to do the one day to feed the world stuff. Because honestly, how else are we going to get to this?
The scope, the scale of the need, it just demands collaboration, but there's just spiritual benefit. And we're not doing this alone.
Yeah, that's
we're
right.
Together.
Amen.
Way more fun.
I'm so glad John Wimber stomped on your feet way back when to see what's happening now.
I am for the result.
Well, Bryan, it would be great to follow up with you again someday and hear more about this. Okay, great. Well, I'll follow up with you soon. Thanks, man.
Thank you.
The We Are Vineyard podcast is a production from the team at Vineyard USA. If you've been enjoying the podcast, here's a few ways you can help us. Leave us a review on the podcast platform of your choice. This helps more people find us. Connect with us online for additional resources. Our website is vineyardusa.org, and we're on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at VineyardUSA. Thanks for listening. See you next week.